One of the fiercest debates among Star Wars fans between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker is the element of Rey's nothingness. For many, Episode 9's reveal of Rey's heritage erased the specialness of her being a girl from nowhere. This aspect of her character was deeply important to a very vocal portion of the fandom. And though there were some, myself included, who found Rey's arc in Rise of Skywalker very resonant, it's hard not to sympathize with the feeling of having that nobody story taken away.
You are a Palpatine.
It may be small comfort for some, but there is reason to rejoice. For while Rey may indeed be a Palpatine/Skywalker, there is a character who does come from nowhere. There's a character who rose up from meager origins to claim her own power and grow into the most Jedi of all the Jedi. I'm talking about Ahsoka Tano. So what does being the most Jedi means? It means having a destiny like the Force pushed on you and still growing up with a certain strength of character. It means understanding that the light side of the Force isn't about dogma, structure, or fashionable brown robes. It's about recognizing the right thing to do and acting on it. It's not necessarily about dual-wielding lightsabers, but that doesn't also hurt either. The thing about Ahsoka Tano that is so remarkable is that it feels like she shouldn't have worked at all. In fact, even knowing how popular the character grew to be, this is how we described her in the Honest trailer for the Clone Wars movie.
Ahsoka Tano, a sidekick built out of corporate memos to make a cool young girl Jedi who's cool and does cool stuff.
You're stuck with me, Sky Guy.
What did you just call me?
On top of this, we knew she wasn't present in Revenge of the Sith and had never seen her in any other Star Wars media, so if there was ever a character who had Poochie the dog written all over her, it was Ahsoka. Let's take a step back and look at her overall arc and history as a character. Ahsoka was 3 years old when her Force powers became known, and though she would eventually be discovered and brought to the temple to be trained by Master Plo Koon, we learned that she was initially almost taken by an imposter Jedi who sought to enslave her and use her powers for their own nefarious purpose. According to her recollections in the Ahsoka novel, she resisted going with the imposter based on pure Force instinct, even though her village wanted her to go. This is perhaps the first recorded instance of Ahsoka's strong will and her sense of her own powerful survival instinct. Her ability to choose not to go along with something if her own moral compass is telling her not to. This is an aspect of Ahsoka that makes her ultimately fit in so well with Anakin as his Padawan. She shares much of his impulsiveness and recklessness.
They have a penchant for playing loose with regulations and rules of command.
Anakin and Ahsoka are known to banter and compete with each other over things like droid kill counts. Like her master, this is also an aspect of Ahsoka's personality that sometimes gets her into trouble. She loses a squadron of clone pilots during the Battle of Ryloth when she disobeys a retreat order, and later on Felucia almost dies herself as a result of doing it again. But perhaps unlike Anakin, Ahsoka seems to have a much stronger handle on learning from her mistakes and absorbing those lessons of her failure. When she returns to the command of a squadron over Ryloth, she's able to better understand the consequences of her actions. When her lightsaber is stolen on Coruscant and she must go on a quest to find it, it drives home for her the importance of its value, a lesson she is then able to impart to other younglings herself.
This weapon is your life.
But what she also doesn't do is let those times when she had something to learn prevent her from taking risks and pushing back when she needs to. This was best represented during the Onderon Rebellion arc on Clone Wars. Given strict instruction not to intervene in the occupation of Onderon herself, but simply to train the rebels, Ahsoka tries her best to comply. But the further the injustice on the planet goes, and the more the corruption of the Separatist-backed government reveals itself, and the more she sees the people around her really struggling, the harder it is for her to stand by and do nothing. Until she doesn't. And therein lies the power of Ahsoka as a character. The ultimate vibe of the Clone Wars is inevitably one of tragedy. For all the epic battles and heroics of the storylines we follow, the audience largely is aware of the doom that awaits the Republic and the Jedi at the end of it. This narrative largely handcuffs most of the Jedi characters we see towards their inevitable fate. It was already canon that the Jedi who appear in Revenge of the Sith are caught off guard by the Purge and Darth Sidious's ultimate plans. As such, there was only so much room within the narrative of the Clone Wars for them to question their own behavior or values to a degree that would bring about change. But Ahsoka, by virtue of being untethered to that film, is able to shed that same baggage. In fact, it's telling that often the times when Ahsoka gets the most in trouble, they're the moments when she's thinking and behaving like a Jedi and not a soldier. In the Zygeria slavery arc, the Jedi's history of bringing down slavery rings in the Republic is pointed out, a task they're not as focused on during the current era.
For thousands of years, Zygeria supplied slave labor to the galaxy. Then the Jedi came.
In multiple times in the series, including the Senate Murders arc and the currently airing arc of the returned final season, it's pointed out that the impoverished people of Coruscant feel largely forgotten and discarded by those who were once sworn to protect them. This is a scathing indictment on how far the Jedi have fallen from where they're supposed to be.
They've forgotten all about us.
Ahsoka's departure from the Jedi following her false accusation for the bombing of the temple is an allegory for that failure. Here is a character who time and time again has taken the best of their teachings inside herself to try to make the universe better. She stood up against slavers, she's helped free worlds from oppressive forces, and saved younglings and Padawans from pirates and traffickers single-handedly on multiple occasions. And yet when she needed the Jedi the most, in her hour of greatest need, they turned their backs on her.
You've already made your decision, haven't you? This meeting is just a formality!
But here's the most important thing. Ahsoka doesn't turn to the dark side. Faced with the feeling of betrayal from the order she's been raised within for most of her life, Ahsoka doesn't follow down the path of those like Anakin Skywalker, Count Dooku, and Ben Solo. She walks away from the Jedi, refuses the title, defiantly stating, "I am no Jedi," even decades later.
I am no Jedi.
But it's not just those who fell to the dark side whose path Ahsoka doesn't follow. When faced with their failures, the 3 Jedi of the original Star Wars trilogy, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, and Luke Skywalker, all do the same thing. Run off to hide in some distant place in the galaxy and think about what they've done. Yoda and Obi-Wan after Revenge of the Sith, and Luke after his failure with Ben Solo.
I came to this island to die.
Ahsoka, on the other hand, stays a part of the universe, a part of the struggle. Even when she thinks she should run away and hide, she's unable to. This is most clearly illustrated in the Ahsoka novel that bridges the gap between Clone Wars and Rebels. Over the course of the novel, set 1 year after the events of Sith, Ahsoka works to free an entire moonful of people from an Imperial occupation, protects a young, Force-sensitive girl from an Inquisitor, and begins operating as an independent space vigilante, responding to distress calls and trying to save as many people as she can around her. Ultimately, she gains the attention of Bail Organa, who was in the early days of forming the Rebel Alliance, and eventually Ahsoka sees a valuable role for herself in the organization, taking over its intelligence operations and creating the Rebel spy network known as Fulcrum. During all this time, even while she's convincing herself that she's not getting involved, her subconscious betrays her true feelings. Throughout the novel, Ahsoka has a small quirk of picking up pieces of scrap metal she finds along her journey. It's presented mostly as a series of asides until the moment she finally looks at them all together and realizes that even when she was telling herself she wasn't getting involved, she was collecting the parts for new lightsabers for herself. Her brain was telling her she could be no use, but her heart was sure she could be. Those lightsabers ignite as a brilliant silver. This reflects the fact that the kyber crystals in them are the restored crystals from an Inquisitor's once red saber, bled by his force of the dark side and now purified by Ahsoka. But they also represent the fact that Ahsoka is an independent Force user. The neutral color of these lightsabers has fueled some of the desire to apply the term Grey Jedi to her, but this feels misguided. Ahsoka is not gray. She never falters from the light. With Ahsoka, we see the possibility of nuance within the storytelling of Star Wars that doesn't have to jettison the heightened binary struggle of good versus evil, dark versus light that is at the heart of George Lucas's initial mythos. What we've seen of her path so far in the time after the Clone Wars and into Rebels is of someone who continues to fight against the darkening of the galaxy. There's no moral grayness to her, she's not an anti-hero, she's just free of the shackles of bureaucracy and can focus on what being a Jedi actually means. To her, it's more about how you behave than the title. Even in the moments where she feels she's able to act out of vengeance, like in her battle with Darth Vader on Rebels, she ultimately still continues to try to appeal to Anakin's humanity. Her anger and rage are not sustainable. Her compassion is.
I won't leave you!
Then you will die.
The Jedi teach a doctrine of non-attachment, but perhaps what Ahsoka came to understand by the end is that it was the Jedi's own toxic attachment to their name and the importance of their order that prevented them from accomplishing their actual mission. For Ahsoka, moving forward became about just doing the next right thing in front of her and trying her hardest to help as many as she could. Even when she tries to run away, twice in fact during her novella, she is unable to resist returning to help those that she left behind. In a galactic story marked by epic heroes, whose decisions can break societies and rip or mend the galaxy in an unyielding cycle, Ahsoka works to protect as many as she can. She endures her trials, and when they're completed, she simply moves on to the next one and lets the Force and her own destiny take her where she will. She's a shining example of what a Jedi could be, and perhaps once were, but she is no Jedi.
My name is Ahsoka Tano.